Alright, JK, so in lesson 5.2, in this case, guys, we're interpreting parabolas in context. All we're doing with this lesson, today's lesson or today's class, we actually do have two lessons. So first part in this case, guys, is we want to go ahead and identify the key features of quadratic equations. Key features in this case, guys, would be our y-intercept, our vertex, and our x-intercepts. So students in this case can interpret key features of parabolas. A few of our vocab terms here is maximum, minimum, which refers in this case to the vertex or the y-coordinate of the vertex, a starting point, which represents our y-intercept, and the ground, which in most cases will be represented by the x-intercept. So let's go ahead and get started here with this first. If I'd be in class, I'd give you guys a physical copy of this, but I'm not. So I want you guys to actually sketch this out, and we will be filling this out as we're doing this, okay? So just go ahead and do a sketch here, guys. Go ahead and pause the video, do a sketch, and then we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So starting off in this case, guys, main points whenever you're graphing quadratics is starting off with this first one. Well, before I do that, actually, before I focus on that one, I do want to go ahead and identify my x-axis and my y-axis. So x in this case, guys, always runs horizontally. This is x. Y in this case always runs vertically. So this is y. All right, so first point I want to go ahead and identify here is this point here. The point that crosses the y-axis is known as our y-intercept. So this is the y-intercept, and I'll just abbreviate and write INT. And most of the time, guys, whenever we're looking at quadratic graphs, y-intercept actually represents our starting point. Let me do it a different color. So it actually represents our starting point. And PT in this case, guys, is abbreviation for point, starting point, at the beginning, at the time of. So it's basically where you start off, where we start off. That's our starting point. So that's one main one. All right. Now, next one in this case, guys, y-intercept, once again, it's always going to be located on the y-axis. You will have times where the y-intercept is here or it's going to be down here. Once again, any point on the y-axis is the y-intercept. Moving on now in this case, guys, I want to go ahead and identify this point here. And if you don't know what that point is already, this is actually the vertex. And vertex in this case, guys, is actually going to be the highest or the lowest point in the parabola. So in this case, this actually would be considered the highest point, which would be a maximum. Other times we will be having vertex where it's down here. So once again, vertex represents the highest or the lowest point. So in this case, let me just write, it could be the max. In this case, it's the maximum, but it could be the maximum or the minimum. All right, and in the vertex, guys, there's actually 2 points, or it's actually a coordinate point of x and y. All right, the x in this case, guys, is mostly referred to as the x coordinate of the vertex. And then the y in this case is obviously the y coordinate of the vertex. Now in 5.1, we also saw that the x coordinate of the vertex is also known as the axis of symmetry. So this line here that you guys see here, I'll go ahead and do that in purple. This line that I'm just drawing over it is known as the axis of symmetry. This line will always cross the vertex. And in this case, guys, I will be writing axis of symmetry. And once we get familiar with this term, I'll actually just be referring to it as AOS. All right, just abbreviating AOS, axis of symmetry. All right, and this axis of symmetry is always going to be the same value as the x-coordinate of the vertex. These two are exactly the same. So if you know the axis of symmetry, then you know the x-coordinate of the vertex, and vice versa. Now, these last 2 points in this case, guys, these last 2 points would be known as our, let's do, what color? Orange. We have orange already. Let's do orange. Okay. So in this case, guys, this point here would be known as the x-intercept. Now, most of the time, guys, we will be having 2 x-intercepts. But main focus in this case would be, in this case, either the one that comes at the end. Just because most of the time, the x-intercepts represent a time. And time in this case can't be negative, so that's why we don't focus on this one. So in this case, x-intercepts, and most of the time, in order for us to actually identify x-intercepts, it's either going to be referencing something about reaching ground level. Reaching ground level. Yeah, just reaching the ground. More or less, that's how we can reference to that. So, let's go ahead and move on then. So once again, y-intercept, vertex, or x-intercept. So, let's go ahead and get started with our first example. There's only 2 examples on this one. First example here, it says identify the y-intercept of the y-intercept, vertex, and x-intercept. And in this case, guys, it's just a random picture. We have someone here, a student, who is shooting some hoops, and he obviously missed, right? So that was a complete miss, which is totally fine, right? Because we always try to get better. So in this case, I am going to be using this example as a parabola. Once again, parabola is a U shape, and as you guys can see, we could basically see math everywhere. So, let's go ahead and actually do a little graph here. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line there, and then we have something like this. All right. This is my x-axis, this is my y-axis, and I want to go ahead and identify or actually plot y-intercept, vertex, and x-intercept. So starting off in this case, guys, y-intercept is always representing our starting point. Y-intercept always represents our starting point. So in this case, we do have our starting ball somewhere around here. So this here would be considered my y-intercept. Y-intercept right there. It's fun here because that's where we started throwing the ball, right? In this case, I want to go ahead and now focus on the vertex. Vertex in this case, guys, is actually the highest point in our parabola. And as we keep on going up, 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 we probably reach the height or the highest point somewhere up here. All right, I'm not exactly sure which of those two, but it's somewhere in between here. All right, so that would be our vertex. And when it reaches the ground, or when it's obviously coming down, there's going to be a point, or like the lowest point in this case, where it meets the x-axis. That would be considered our x-intercept. And I can consider this here my x-intercept. All right. So that's just us labeling this here. So that's just a little sketch you guys will be doing. So make sure you guys sketch that out. Once again, parabola would go something like that. And then come back down.